Okay, so I showed you last time how to do animation with Revit, but now I want to show you how to do animation with 3ds Max using the same scene or the same project, and show you that you can do a lot more with Max than with Revit, especially with animation. And so I've got here the file that I've linked from Revit, and so just to show you something right away that you can easily do with Revit that is virtually impossible, sorry, you can easily do with 3ds Max that is virtually impossible with Revit. I'm going to show you how to make a simple animation where the lights change. And so here you can see I've got the lights turned on, and the lights are all instances, which means they're like a block or a family in Revit or a block in AutoCAD. So if I change one, they will all change. So you can see there, if I turn the one off that I have selected, they should all turn off. So that means I only need to animate one of them and they should all animate in the same way. And so again, so I'm going to make a simple animation where the lights turn on, which is an easy animation to do in Max, but virtually impossible in Revit. And so to create animation in Max, you tend to create keys or keyframes. It's the way you do it in Revit as well. So in Revit you create keyframes by placing camera points, but in Max you can do a lot more again when you're creating keyframes. And you have these tools down the bottom below this slider. So the slider here represents frames. So at the moment I have 100 frames in the animation, and below that we have buttons to set keyframes or important activities or changes in the animation. So I have also to the right of that the playback controls, so play forwards and backwards one frame and then forwards and backwards to the start and the end. And then just below and to the right you have the time configuration. So I'm going to click on that to begin with so that I can increase the number of frames in my animation. Alright, so at the moment it's 100 frames long, and so do you have any idea how long that would be in time? Right idea. Yeah, so you've got, if you said 30, that's the right idea, because you have 30 frames per second. So if we have 100 frames, that's 3.3 seconds, roughly, of animation. Oh, did you say 3 else? Okay, so I want 5 seconds of animation. So I'm going to make it have an end time of exactly 150. And then click OK, and you'll see now that the bar down below has changed. So I'm going to begin with my light setting here. So with lights in Max you have two ways of setting the brightness. You can either set a brightness directly up here, but that's greyed out because this option here is ticked, which lets you set a percentage. So at the moment it's on 100%, which means full brightness. I'm going to set that to 0. So the light's turned off, essentially. And then I'm going to turn on Auto Key. So Auto Key is a way of setting automatic keyframes. And you can see when you do that, that this slider turns red. So I'm just going to drag that slider all the way to the end, and then take my value here up to 100%. So I'm just dragging there, or you can type in 100. So notice it's put in a keyframe at frame 150, but also just after 0. So it's at frame 1 or 2. We'll just have a look there. and yeah, it's at frame 1, which is where it should be. So, so you can see then it doesn't start at 0. Frame 0 is your first frame. It starts just after that. And so I'll turn auto key off now. And let's maximise that view. Press play. And it's going to play it through as fast as it can. But sometimes the hardware can't quite cope. So I'll turn that off. And so you have an option down the bottom called adaptive degradation. So that's this cube with the yellow highlight. I'm going to turn that off. Adaptive degradation is going to reduce the display quality to try and keep the playback speed consistent. Instead, when it's turned off, it'll keep the display quality and reduce the speed of the playback. So got a simple animation there with the lights turning on. And so I can now export that and we can view it at its actual speed as a movie file. So it'd be nice to render that later on, and if you come into the class that we have over the holidays, we'll be able to set things to render for several days over the break. So if you had some animations set up ready to go, as shaded, we can then set them to render, which would be a nice thing. So under Tools here though, I'm going to go to Preview, grab Viewport, and then create Preview Animation. And so there you can see I've got the option for the output, and I'm going to go to custom file there and choose where I want to save the file. So I'm just going to save it onto a local folder here and call it hub test lights on. And I'll just use the default encoder. So you've got a few other options, but that one's fine. And so then I'm going to leave the rendering level on what it is currently, which is realistic. So you can see up there, that's what I'm using in the viewport. Make sure textures is turned on, and that's it. So I'm just going to click create. And you can see then it's going through each frame. So it'll take a little while. Actually, I'll see if the pausing works. For some reason the pausing hasn't worked, but let's try it this time. See. Yeah, for some reason. So we've done that one animation, and so here you can see it playing back at its real speed. So 5 seconds is probably a good time for that. And then again, if you want to increase the quality, that was done at fairly low quality. When you go to create preview animation, you can increase this percentage of output. So if you say increase that to 100, that would then be 640 by 480. 200 would be getting towards fairly decent resolution. Oh, sorry, there's a max. So 144 is, I think, the max you can go to there. But that's a very good resolution. For animation, you shouldn't need to do any more than that anyway. 922 by 691. Especially the shaded animation from Max. It can handle lower resolutions than the ones you do from Revit. So, but I'll set it back to 50 because want to show you some other things. So now I want to do similar animation but with the sunlight changing throughout the day. And so for that I'm going to turn the lights off by going to the light lister under Tools, and then turn the sky and the sun on. And you can see it's become very bright. And that's natural. So under rendering, I'm going to go to exposure control and increase that EV value. So it's just like photography, and in fact rendering in Revit's exactly the same. So now you can see, I know with this one I need an EV of about 10. So you can see then with the sunlight I should get a fair bit of natural lighting in the space. And to make it a bit cleaner, I'm going to select all of those lights. No, sorry, I'm not going to select them. So on the display tab, sorry. So over here, I'm going to go to the display tab and just tick lights, and you can see that way I can hide all of the lights in one hit. Okay, but I'm going to just turn that back off so that I can see the lights again, because I just want to see if it hides the sun. I should still be able to select it, but just want to make sure. Yes, I can. Okay, so just make sure you can still find your sun. And so even though lights are hidden, it does hide part of the sun icon. You can see there, even when the lights are hidden, you can see that disk of the sun. If you want that to hide, I think it's helpers that will hide it completely. Oh no, so it's something else. Anyhow, that doesn't matter. So we've got the disk, and that's what we need. And then by going to the motion panel, I can change the time. So I'm going to take the slider back to the left there, and well, actually, I'll show you a trick. So I want to make a new animation, and so that it doesn't interfere with the lights that I've just worked with, and so I can have the sun at a different time, I can always add more frames. So I'll have, let's say, an end time of 300. And I can do my sun animation from there. So it's going to go from frame 150 to frame 300. And I'm going to take the time there, so you can see here I've got the hours on 15. So that's 3 o'clock, or 15:20. Take that back to exactly 1500 or 3 o'clock. And then I'm going to take the hours back to the morning. So 8 o'clock in winter this is, so yes, and about 8 o'clock is when we'll get some sun starting to come into the space. So maybe I'll start at 7 and then we can go to 8 and then so on. So at 7 o'clock I want it to start, and just like before I'm going to turn on AutoKey. And then I'm just going to change my time there using the slider, clicking on the arrow, sorry, and you can see there that's increasing the hours. And it's going to take it to the time when I want it to finish. So 1700, which is 5 o'clock, might be a little late, so I might take that back to 4, where I'll still have some light in the space. So again, that's done the animation, but again, it's done it from frame 1 to frame 150, just like the lights that I did. And in fact, now I think about it, I think I will take it to 1500. So again, that's the animation complete. So it'll finish in darkness again, but that's okay. So now I'll turn auto key off. So I just wanted to show you there that I have these two keyframes at 1 and 150. So I'm going to drag them, the second one to 300, and then the first one to 150. Or shall I make it 151? And if you're wondering how I know exactly the frame, it tells you down on the grey bar at the bottom. So you can see there it's telling me moving keys from 151 to 152. And I'll go back then to the left, and you can see again 151 to 145. So it's fairly easy to drag those keyframe sliders. Okay, so now, just like before, I'm going to go to Tools, grab Viewport, and then Create Preview Animation. At this time, I'm going to change the range to Custom Range and make it go from frame 150 to 300. And that's it. So now, again, I'll change the file output. So we'll call this Moving Sun. That's a really nice thing to do a sun study. It's important to look at that in your design and think about the way the sun changing throughout the day is going to affect your design. So it's a really useful animation to do just from a design point of view. Okay, so you can see now it's generating that. It's actually going a little bit faster than the other one did before. But it'll take a while, so I'll just pause that and start recording again in a minute. Okay, so now that animation's finished, I can open it and show you it's about half the, or double the speed that we want. Now, with some programs, you can change the playback speed, which is a good way of testing out to see if that's right. So you can see they're much better at a slower speed. It's still too fast. So that's better. Okay, so to create that again in Max, we just need to adjust the total number of frames. So remember, it's starting at frame 150, going to frame 300, which gives me 5 seconds. So if I again go to time configuration, I want to make it basically double the length. So I want to make this basically double the length. And so you can use rescale time quite often to change the length of animation. But here I don't want to do that because I have the lights at the right speed, the previous animation. So instead I'm going to increase this total time to 450. So I'm adding another 150 frames, or another 5 seconds. And now I can simply drag this keyframe, which represents where the sun finishes its movement, all the way to the end, to 450. It's just taking a moment to do that. Hope it doesn't crash right now. So that's just gone off the scale. I'll just try that again. There we go. Okay, so now if I play this back, it will be at exactly half the speed because I have doubled the frames. So the animation is twice as long, and in that extra time the sun is moving the same amount. So in other words, the sun moves at half the rate it did before. Okay, so I won't export that animation again right now, I'll do that later. So now I want to show you how you can create animation with a moving camera. So I'm going to go back to a point within the area where the sun's moving. So I'll take it back to 150. And then I'm going to turn the sun off again because the sun is moving in this time period, and I don't want to see that. So I'm going to go to the light lister, turn the sun off and the sky as well, and I'm going to turn those lights back on. So remember, the lights should be at 100% by the time I get to frame 150. And so I can cheat a little bit and put an animation in the same period as I'm doing my sun animation. And so I'm going to go back to rendering and exposure control and take the exposure value back down to what I had before for the interior, which is about 5. And then go a little brighter, 4. I think 3 is a bit too bright, so 4 I think should be reasonable. And now I want to make a simple animation called an orbit. So you can see in the top viewport there, I've just zoomed and panned using the middle mouse button so that I can see the camera that has come in from Revit. So I'm going to right click and choose move, and then I'm going to click and drag while holding down shift on that yellow square in between X and Y. So when that yellow square comes up, I'm going to make sure I've held down shift first before then clicking and dragging, and that will give me a copy of that camera. So I'm going to bring it slightly forward. Then change the option there to copy, click OK, and then on the Modify tab, I'm going to change the type of that camera to a target camera. So I'm just going to zoom in to show you that there's a target now that comes out from that camera, and I can select that. So I'm going to, again, just make sure I get the move tool. So here it's got move, and that gizmo needs to come up. If you don't see the XY gizmo, just make sure that the camera isn't still selected. And so again, just like the camera, I can now click and drag. I'm not going to use shift this time. I just want to move that target point into the center roughly of that bar area. I'm going to select the camera again. I might move it slightly forward still because it's just not quite far enough. And so now I want this, as I was saying before, to move around the bar. I'm going to right click in the camera viewport and then type C on the keyboard, which is going to change it to the camera that's selected. And now, again, I'm going to right click in the top viewport, switch back to it, and you can see if I move my camera, it's going to show me the changes in the view. And animating a camera is the easiest thing in the world in Max, because again you just use Auto Key for that. So remember, I want the animation to start at frame 150. So I'm going to put my camera where I want it to begin. Let's say I want it to begin roughly down here. Don't want to go too far back. I'm also going to change the lens so it's got a wider field of view. So over in the Modify tab you can see you've got your stock lenses. So I'm going to change it. Well, first I'll try 28mm. See how that looks. 24mm might be better. I think that's a bit too wide actually, so I think 28 is pretty good. And then I'll turn auto key again on just like before. So now you'll see if I drag the camera, it's going to add some keyframes. So these grey marks again you can see on the time slider. So it's added one at frame 1, another one at frame 150. I want this camera, that first movement to take maybe, let's say, 2 seconds. So that's 60 frames. Okay, so I'm going to drag that second keyframe to frame 210. And remember we want the animation to start at frame 150, so I'm going to drag the first keyframe to frame 150. Now I'll drag the time slider across to, let's say, frame 260. So I'm just going to keep these distances fairly equal. And again, now drag the camera around further. And you can see it's added in a new keyframe for me. So that's what Auto Key does for you. As you make changes, it's automatically going to create keyframes. So I'll drag it around further again. I'll drag the time slider across further. And again, move my camera to where I want it to be at the next point. So that's for, for frame 318. Doesn't need to be too precise or exactly even. But you can see it's added a new keyframe there. So again, dragging it another time, and again moving the camera. And then again, all the way to the end this time, and I'll move the camera one last time to where I want it to finish. Now you can see there that it's ended up looking slightly to the right. So I'm going to select the target and just drag it slightly so that the camera's looking where I want it to. But notice it's added a keyframe at the end for the target, but it's also put a keyframe in at frame 1. So by default, it adds keyframes at the first frame when you make your first auto key. And all you need to do is drag that keyframe to where you want it to start. So I'm going to drag that to 150, just like I did with the camera. So that's an animation done. So again, I'm just going to take it time slider back to frame 150. Press play. Okay, so you can see that's a simple orbit. Now, at that point, you can see that the target is, again, looking too far to the left this time. Not a problem. You can turn auto key on again. And then with the target, I've got the target still selected. I can adjust that so it's looking where I want it to. And it will adjust the frames in between. That's the whole point of keyframes. So now you can see as I play it through, it's remaining focused on what I want it to. So again, over here, maybe that's looking a bit too far to the left. So from maybe there on. So again, you can just move that keyframe, or move that target to create a new keyframe. And again, that will help to keep it centered. So again here, maybe from about there, that's okay, but from about there, it's looking a bit too far to the left. So again, you can just bring that target back. So you can see as I'm scrubbing through the animation, that both the target and the camera are moving together. So it gives you a lot more control than you have with a program like Revit, which isn't obviously designed to be an animation program. Okay, so I'll just play that through. Okay, so I can even combine those animations and have the lights turning on at the beginning, followed by the movement. And so now I can see there, probably still got to be adjusted a little bit at the end, so it's not a problem. You just go back to that point. It needs to change, so there, I think from there on, that's not too bad, but from about here, I think it can come a bit more to the right. So again, just moving the camera there, but I need to turn auto key on first, so that it stores that in the animation. So it's a lot of trial and error, but again, it's fairly intuitive because it tracks the changes you make and automatically creates those frames for you. Okay, so let's play that through one last time. Okay, so now, again, just like before, I can export that, same way as before, Tools, Preview Grab Viewport, and then create Preview Animation. Make sure you change the file name. And so, call this Orbit. And so I could actually do this one from frame 0, I think, and include the lights turning on with that as well. So I'll just do that from 0 to 450. And this one, I might increase the quality to 100. I'll just create that and I'll show you that afterwards.